I was supposed to be on a flight to Denver heading to my sister Carol's lake house for the holidays. My suitcase was already checked and I had my boarding pass in hand. But just as I pulled into the long-term parking lot, something stopped me cold. I realized I'd forgotten the original will, Robert's will, the real one, not the copy I kept tucked away in the desk drawer. I figured I'd swing back home real quick and grab it, be back on the road in 5 minutes tops. But when I walked through that front door, what I heard was something no mother should ever have to hear. Not in her own house. Not from her only son. The door gave a soft creak as I opened it. I didn't call out. The air felt strange, too still. I held my keys in my hand but didn't drop them in the bowl by the entryway like I usually did. Something inside me, something deep in my chest, just hushed. I stepped quietly into the hallway, my shoes brushing the wood floor. That's when I heard them, voices, coming from the study. Low, deliberate, careful. I froze by the archway, pressing my back against the wall, hardly breathing. "If she's showing signs, we can build the case," came a voice I knew too well. It was my son Daniel. "She's 74, replied another man, calm and clinical. "With the right paperwork, diminished capacity isn't hard to prove." His name was Ellis Barnes, the lawyer Daniel brought around after Robert passed, supposedly to help organize Dad's estate. My heart pounded slow and heavy. I couldn't see their faces, but I could hear everything between the lines. They were talking about guardianship. "About me," Daniel went on. "I've already started compiling a list. She's been misplacing things, repeating herself. She barely touched her taxes last year." I wanted to step in and say his name to make it stop. But instead I backed away carefully, avoiding every creaky floorboard. Outside, the afternoon sun was shining, but I felt frozen to the bone. I got back in the car and just sat there staring out the windshield with the keys still in my hand. The woman who'd raised him, who worked nights filing in archives so he could go to college without debt, was now being treated like some case file. I pressed my lips together, not out of anger but out of disbelief. Something shifted inside me in that moment. It didn't break, not yet. But the warmth that had lived in my chest, whatever was left of it, began to cool. And the hardest part wasn't what I heard. It was realizing I had seen this coming and chosen not to look. If you've ever watched your own child become a stranger in your own home, then maybe you'll understand what I mean. That day I stopped being just a mother. I started becoming something else entirely. Let me take you there. I didn't go back to the airport. I didn't call Carol. I just kept driving. My hands stayed steady on the wheel, but my thoughts drifted far away. I passed the interstate exit and let instinct guide me through old neighborhoods I hadn't seen in years. When I finally pulled over, I found myself parked in front of a little bakery, tucked between a laundromat and a weathered barbershop. The awning looked new, but the smell wafting through the open door was exactly the same: warm cinnamon, melted butter, toasted almonds. This was the spot Robert used to bring me every single Sunday, rain or shine, back when we lived in that cramped 2-bedroom apartment off Maple Street. Back when Daniel was still a kid with scraped knees and a head full of questions. I stepped inside. The counter had been swapped for something shiny and modern, but the tables were still mismatched, each holding a little vase with fresh flowers. I ordered a coffee and sat by the window. My fingers wrapped around the cup, searching for warmth, something to ground me. Outside, people hurried past in thick winter coats, heads down, trying to stay warm. I remembered Robert sitting at this exact table, reading the paper while Daniel stacked sugar packets into tall little towers. He used to ask about everything: bridges, trains, how elevators worked. He never wanted simple answers. He wanted blueprints. And I gave them to him. I brought home books from the library, circled paragraphs with a pencil, even signed him up for robotics camp before he ever thought to ask. He was curious then, not entitled. Not like now. Somewhere between that little boy and the man I overheard this morning, something changed. Not all at once. More like a kettle left on the stove. First a soft hiss, then a loud boil that fills the room before you notice. I remembered when he insisted on handling Robert's estate, told me it was too much for me. When he fired our family accountant and brought in a firm I'd never heard of. When he set up automatic payments for my taxes without even mentioning it to me. I saw the signs. But I gave him the benefit of the doubt. That's what tired mothers do. That's what widows hope for. But now it all clicked into place. Like puzzle pieces that had been jammed in the wrong way, finally snapping together to show the full picture. I left the bakery with half my coffee untouched. The taste stayed with me, but not because of the beans. It was the memory. Outside, the sky had turned gray. I zipped my coat all the way to my chin and stood still for a moment. I wasn't ready to go home just yet. Not because I was scared, but because I needed to remember who I was before I started letting other people decide that for me. And that quiet little detour became the start of something. The library's back lot was mostly empty when I pulled in. Late afternoon had already started folding into that soft gray winter haze. Without even thinking, I parked in the same spot I used to when I worked there. Old habits, I guess. For a while, I just sat and watched the branches of the old oak tree near the back entrance sway gently in the wind. Inside, it was quieter than I remembered. The carpets were new, the checkout stations modernized, but the smell hadn't changed. Ink, dust, worn wood. That scent always made me feel like myself again. Capable. Collected. Whole. I walked right past the fiction shelves, straight toward the archives in the back. That room hadn't changed much at all. Same tall filing cabinets, same flickering beige lights overhead. I nodded at the young woman behind the desk and asked if I could review a document I'd once cataloged, a copy of my husband Robert's will. She didn't question me, just handed over a clipboard and pointed me toward the table in the far corner. I found the file almost instinctively. My hands knew exactly where to look. The folder was thick not because of the will itself but because of all the notes Robert had added. He never left anything untouched. Margin scribbles, arrows, dates, abbreviations in that short, firm handwriting of his. It was his way of making sense of the world, and over time it became mine too. I spread the pages out gently and scanned every line. The will was intact. No edits, no marks. But what stood out were the sticky notes tucked inside. One in particular read, "Dolores, if you're ever unsure, the answer is always in the numbers." I flipped to the final page. There was a chart. Assets, property, investments, bonds. And next to each entry, a note, D to retain, hold for independent legal review, no full access for son, and clear as day, do not assign Grant as manager. Robert had thought this through. He had trusted me to see it clearly when the time came. I felt something warm and tight rise in my chest, not from anger but recognition. That quiet sense of knowing who I was again. I pulled a notepad from my bag and started making a list. First, certified copies. Second, independent legal counsel. Third, a full audit of all recent financial activity. I underlined each item slowly with care and certainty. By the time I walked out of the library, the sun had slipped behind the rooftops. The sky had turned a deep navy blue and the cold didn't bother me. I walked to the car with purpose, my breath rising in soft clouds. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel old. I didn't feel confused. I didn't feel like a woman being managed. I felt like Dolores Whitaker again, the woman who used to sort rare manuscripts, who could quote library policy from memory, who once found a Revolutionary War letter stuck behind a broken filing cabinet. And now I was going to find my way back, one document at a time. That next morning I moved slowly. Not because I hurt but because I needed the illusion to feel real. I tucked a small voice recorder into the inside lining of my coat. It was one I'd used back in my interview days at the university. Barely the size of my thumb, with a gentle little click when it started recording. I made sure the red light blinked once, then faded into the wool. I left the front door unlocked. The sun was just high enough to cast soft shadows across the kitchen floor. I turned off the overhead lights and let the morning light fill the room naturally. I made tea, spilled just a little on the counter, and left the kettle slightly ajar. Small messes. The kind someone might chalk up to forgetfulness. By 10:30, Daniel arrived. I hadn't asked him to. These days he hardly ever called before dropping in. He came in holding a grocery bag and wore that cautious little smile he always used when he wanted something. I sat at the kitchen table in my robe, a half-filled crossword puzzle in front of me, a pen without a cap resting beside it. I looked up slowly as he kissed my cheek and mentioned how chilly the house felt. I nodded and said I must have forgotten to turn on the heat again. He unpacked a container of soup, a loaf of bread, and a tin of crackers. Then the performance began. He asked how I'd been sleeping. I said I wasn't sure, then trailed off mid-sentence. I let my fingers fumble just a bit with the spoon. When he offered to warm the soup, I smiled and said yes, like it was such a help. Daniel moved through my kitchen like he was taking mental notes. His eyes scanned the calendar, the pill bottles near the sink, the unopened mail stacked neatly by the toaster. He pointed out a letter from the insurance company. I told him I hadn't gotten around to it yet. He offered to go through it for me. I acted like I didn't hear him. After lunch, he leaned on the doorway and just looked at me for a long moment. Then he said it, what I'd already known deep down. He told me he'd been looking into care homes. Just options, he said. Places with gardens and music therapy. Staff trained for memory care. His voice was soft, like he was offering me something kind. I blinked, gave him a faint smile and said maybe it'd be nice to have someone else do the cooking for a change. Then I asked him what day it was. That seemed to please him. While he packed up the dishes, I stared quietly out the window. The recorder had been on the entire time. Every word. Every pause. Every calculated kindness. Once he left, I locked the door and went straight to the study. I slipped off my coat and set the recorder gently on the desk. My hands were steady. I sat in silence and replayed the whole visit in my mind, not with anger but with intention. Because now I had something more than memories. I had proof. And the silence, the one that used to haunt me, had become my greatest strength. The next morning, I found Marlene's old number tucked in a yellowed Rolodex behind the cookbook shelf. We hadn't spoken in years. Not because we drifted, but because life sort of folded inward after Robert passed. She and I had worked together for 15 years at the university library. She was sharp. Always saw the crack in a plan before it split open. I called and left a voicemail. Calm and clear. I told her I needed a legal mind I could trust. That it was personal. She texted back within the hour. Said she'd be at my house by 4. When she showed up, she filled the room without crowding it. She wore a navy wool coat, her hair pulled into a tight knot. No chit-chat, no fake smiles. Just steady, grounded Marlene. We sat at the kitchen table while I poured chamomile tea into mismatched cups. I slid the recorder and a file across the table toward Marlene without saying a word. No explanations. Just quiet. She listened to the entire recording straight through, her face calm, unreadable. When it ended, she looked me in the eye and said, "We're going to fix this." Then she opened her laptop, her fingers flying across the keys. She asked if my power of attorney had ever been updated after Robert passed. I told her no. She gave a short nod, already moving forward. The first step, she said, was to revoke Daniel's authority. Then we'd draft a new will, name a trusted executor, and officially notify the state of the changes. Everything would be documented and time-stamped. When she asked if I had digital backups of any of the documents, I told her no. "We'll take care of that too," she said. Over the next hour, she laid out a plan, clean, quiet, and fully legal. Everything Daniel had assumed I'd forgotten, I was preparing to rewrite. Marlene was sharp, exact, but never cold. And she wasn't surprised, not really. She'd seen this kind of thing before. Maybe not always from children, but from people who thought that access automatically meant control. We moved into the den. She scanned Robert's annotated will, then helped me set up encrypted cloud storage. She created a secure folder labeled Dolores, Legal, Private, and showed me how to update files, store medical records, and keep track of document versions. Before she left, she placed a single sheet of paper in front of me, a formal revocation of power of attorney. My name, Daniel's name, the date. I signed it and she slipped it neatly into her briefcase. Just before walking out, she said, "This is the first step." After she left, I sat by the window and watched the bare branches of the dogwood tree moving in the wind. The house was quiet again, but this time it wasn't an empty quiet. It felt solid, grounded, like the foundation of something being rebuilt. One document, one choice, one version of myself at a time. And I wasn't doing it alone anymore. The days that followed took on a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. Marlene had left me with a checklist, but by the second morning I didn't need to look at it. The rhythm of protecting myself had become familiar, almost comforting. It reminded me of those early years working in archiving, when each paper told a story and my job was to preserve its truth. I started with my medical records. I made an appointment with Dr. Walters, the same doctor I'd seen for over 10 years. During the visit, I asked for a full cognitive evaluation, not because I was worried but because I wanted it in writing. He didn't question me. He ran the test, checked my reflexes, went through my chart, then handed me a signed letter that said, "Patient is cognitively sound. No signs of impairment." I folded it gently and placed it in the file folder I now carried with me everywhere. At home, I started pulling together anything that could support my mental clarity: grocery receipts, bank statements with my handwritten notes in the margins, printed emails from the last 2 years. I sorted everything. I dated every page. I divided them into categories: legal, medical, personal. Just like I used to with rare collections. Consistent. Unmistakable. Every single page was scanned and uploaded to the cloud. Marlene had walked me through the steps twice and now I could do it blindfolded. The scanner she lent me was small but fast. Each file carried its own timestamp, its own place in the wall I was quietly building between me and the version of me Daniel thought he could manipulate. In the back of my closet, behind the winter coats and a suitcase I hadn't touched in years, I found an old box labeled Robert, Personal. Inside were letters, mostly little notes from early in our marriage. Grocery lists, quick reminders, scribbles with hearts next to his name. But one page caught my eye. Folded in quarters, tucked between 2 old travel brochures, handwritten in his familiar bold script. No envelope. Just a single page dated 10 years ago. It read, "If the day comes when our son makes you doubt yourself, trust your instinct. You've always seen clearer than you believe." I sat on the edge of the bed, the letter resting in my lap. The house was still. My heart beat slow and steady. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows like fingertips. He had known. Not the exact situation but the possibility. He'd seen something in Daniel I wasn't ready to see back then. But I saw it now. I was ready now. That night I backed up everything again. I sent copies to Marlene and stored a flash drive in the safety deposit box. Then I added one final line to my journal. There's no such thing as being over-prepared when someone is trying to erase you. And for the first time in weeks I slept without turning on the hallway light. I didn't wake up to check the locks. I had done the work. I wasn't playing defense anymore. I was writing my own record, in my own handwriting as it happened. He showed up on a Wednesday. I didn't hear the car but the doorbell rang just after noon. I took a steady breath and walked to the door. No rushing. When I opened it, Daniel stood there holding a paper bag in one hand and a small bunch of supermarket tulips in the other. He smiled. That same innocent look he used to give me when I caught him sneaking a cookie before dinner. I didn't say anything. I just stepped aside and let him in. The tulips were yellow. I thanked him, set them in the old green vase on the dining room table. He commented on how peaceful the house felt. I told him I agreed. He unpacked the bag in the kitchen without asking. Vegetable soup, a crusty roll, a bar of chocolate. I offered to heat the soup but he waved me off and did it himself. He moved through the kitchen like he belonged there. Truth is he always had. We sat at the table. He asked how I'd been sleeping. I told him some nights were better than others. He nodded, then asked if I'd thought about having someone check in once or twice a week. I said that didn't sound like a bad idea. I let my spoon linger in the soup. My hands moved slowly. He watched me, closely, like someone monitoring a dial they've just adjusted. Then he started talking about places he'd looked into. Assisted living communities, he said. With walking paths, wellness programs, private rooms. He said it softly like it was just a suggestion. Said I deserved to rest. Said it wasn't safe to be alone too much. I kept my eyes down, ran my fingers along the edge of the napkin, then said I'd think about it. His face relaxed, maybe even a little relieved. When he offered to drive me out to visit one of the places next week, I gave him a small smile and said, perhaps. Then I asked him to remind me what day it was. He told me and I nodded like I'd forgotten. I let the pause hang between us. He stayed another 30 minutes or so, walking slowly through the hallway, pointing out a flickering bulb in the laundry room and mentioning that the porch railing looked loose. I made a mental note of every little thing Daniel pointed out. Just before he left, he placed his hand gently on my shoulder and told me he only wanted what was best for me. I put my hand over his and said I knew. As soon as the door clicked shut behind him, I walked to the back window and watched him sit in his car. He lingered there a while, typing something on his phone. I could see his lips moving like he was rehearsing a line. I turned away and stepped into the study. The small recorder hidden behind the books had been running since the moment he arrived. Every sentence, every hint, every softly delivered suggestion was now recorded and stored. That evening I uploaded the file and labeled it clearly, Visit, Daniel, Assisted Living Discussion. His performance had been nearly flawless. But so was the record. The next morning I moved the furniture in the living room, not because it needed it but to clear space beneath the side table for a second recorder. Placement mattered. He often paced near the front window when he got nervous and I wanted to catch everything. I tested the angle and made sure the mic would pick up voices on the porch too. I left the front door unlocked again, another small gesture of trust or what could look like vulnerability. Then I walked slowly around the kitchen, creating little signs, intentional but subtle. I left the refrigerator door cracked open just enough. I put the measuring cup in the sink instead of the cabinet. As I passed the hallway mirror, I ran my hand through my hair and left it slightly tousled, like I hadn't noticed. At 10:40 his car pulled into the driveway again. He came up the steps humming like it was just another casual stop. I met him on the porch, clutching my cardigan tightly around my shoulders, and asked what brought him back. He said he was just in the area checking in. He handed me a new brochure from the care center he'd mentioned before. I held it in both hands and let my fingers tremble just enough to be believable. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I lowered myself onto the porch swing and asked him what time it was. He smiled, told me, and sat beside me. I glanced down at the brochure and murmured that the pictures looked nice. He leaned in and started describing the walking paths, the music room, like he was pitching a vacation package. Then he brought up the paperwork again. Said he'd spoken to someone named Ellis Barnes, a legal advisor he trusted, and that Ellis could help handle the filings. He wanted everything squared away just in case something happened. No confusion, he said. I nodded slowly and kept my eyes on the road. He stepped away to take a phone call. Through the open window I could hear him. His voice was measured, not loud but clear. He mentioned Ellis again, along with phrases like expedited review and mental competence. Then I heard him say, next week, and she's nearly ready. I stayed perfectly still, not stiff, just quiet. The porch mic caught every word. When he came back, he handed me a cup of tea. I thanked him and asked if we'd talked about all this during his last visit. He smiled, pleased, like he thought I was making progress. Then he asked if I'd like to visit the care center on Thursday. I said I'd think about it. I took a sip of the tea, held it on my tongue a moment, and said it reminded me of something Robert used to make. Daniel didn't say anything, just nodded and told me he'd call tomorrow. Once he left, I walked back inside and carefully detached the microphone under the porch ledge. I uploaded the new file and labeled it clearly in the archive. Later that night, Marlene stopped by with her tablet. We made 2 encrypted backups of all the recordings. I showed her the brochure Daniel had brought, pointed to a line he'd circled in the admissions policy: transfer of medical proxy contingent on observed need. Marlene looked at me, then handed over a folder of her own. Inside was a sworn affidavit confirming my legal and medical capacity, signed by Dr. Walters and 2 certified notaries. The game had shifted. Daniel thought he was closing in, but I had already documented every move. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't just feel like I was surviving. I was preparing to be seen. 3 days later, Marlene delivered a formal response to Ellis Barnes' office. The envelope was thick with paperwork: my medical affidavit, the newly notarized power of attorney, the revised will, and a signed statement declaring all previous authorizations null and void. Every document was time-stamped, signed in duplicate, and properly recorded. This wasn't a battle cry. It was a shield. Marlene didn't email it. She delivered it herself, quietly, to the downtown legal office where Ellis's firm had a second-floor suite above a dentist's office. She handed it to the receptionist and simply asked that it be placed directly in his hands. Then she left without another word. That evening she called me. Her voice was calm, but I heard something underneath, something hard to name. She told me Ellis had called her directly. He didn't argue. He didn't try to justify anything. He just said he'd reviewed everything and that he would be stepping away from the situation. Then, without prompting, he added something strange: that Robert had once helped him out during a difficult time when few others would. It wasn't a confession, but it was enough to put a crack in the wall Daniel had been building. I sat with that call, thinking it over. I pulled out Robert's old letter again, the one from the box. I ran my thumb across the final line. The next day a courier arrived with a letter. It wasn't from Daniel. It was from Ellis. Just a short message typed on firm letterhead. He stated that he was withdrawing from all legal matters involving my estate. Enclosed was a printed record of every document filed on my behalf over the past 6 months, including the ones Daniel had initiated. The paper trail was thorough. Dates, digital logs, drafts, emails. I spent the whole afternoon reading through it. There were lines I recognized: word for word, from conversations I'd had with Daniel. What he said to me over soup was echoed in a draft declaration of concern, attached to a guardianship petition. There were even template affidavits, blank, waiting for neighbors or friends to fill out, describing memory problems they'd observed. He had been building a case in silence. But now I had his playbook. I called Marlene. We agreed on our next step. She would prepare a formal statement of intent, to be submitted if Daniel tried to file anything further. Not a threat, a warning. Any attempt to override my rights would be treated as legal overreach and elder coercion. And it would go on record. That night, I placed Ellis's letter in the top drawer of my nightstand, right next to Robert's handwritten note. 2 men. One who had tried to erase me in secret. And one who left behind just enough light for me to find my way out. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clear. Like I had finally stepped out of the holding pattern and into open air. The silence in the house didn't feel heavy anymore. It stood beside me. Steady. Strong. And then Daniel came again, without calling, without warning. Just the crunch of gravel under tires and the slow creak of the front gate. I'd been expecting it. That letter from Ellis had changed something, and I knew Daniel wouldn't wait long to try and reassert control. I watched from the window as he came up the walkway with a folder tucked under his arm. His steps were slow, but his shoulders were tense. That mask of concern was still on his face, but now it was stretched thin over something sharper. When I opened the door, I didn't act surprised. I just stepped aside and invited Daniel in. He followed me into the kitchen, mentioning how good the house smelled. I had warmed cider on the stove, let the scent of cinnamon drift through the rooms on purpose. He didn't sit. He placed the folder on the table and remained standing like he was waiting for some cue. I poured 2 mugs, handed one to him, and sat across the table. The space between us felt clean, almost formal, like something about to be signed. He started gently, saying that Ellis Barnes had stepped back unexpectedly, which left some things unresolved. I nodded, letting him speak. He told me he was concerned. Papers had been changed without his knowledge. I took a quiet sip of cider, then opened the drawer beside me and pulled out a small, neat stack of documents. These weren't confrontational. Just facts. The new power of attorney. The updated will. Dr. Walter's statement. The notarized affidavit confirming my capacity. One by one I slid them across the table. He didn't pick them up. He just stared. I looked at him, not with anger, not with fear, but with full clarity. I told him I had made decisions for myself. Legal decisions. Responsible ones. And pretending otherwise wouldn't make that any less true. He didn't say a word. His jaw shifted. His eyes flicked toward the hallway like he was checking for signs, maybe looking to see if I was bluffing or if someone else was here. And then I said something simple. Not all silence is weakness. He stood there a moment longer, then slowly gathered the papers. He placed them back on the table, unfolded, untouched, and walked to the door. He didn't slam it. He didn't speak again. He left exactly the way he came. After I heard the sound of his car fade down the road, I returned to the table, reached beneath the napkin holder, and stopped the recorder. I already knew the name I'd give that file. Quiet confrontation. Full clarity. That night, I didn't dream about Daniel as a child. I didn't hear Robert's voice or legal phrases echoing in my mind. I dreamed of a room full of order. Labeled boxes, clean ledgers, a window open to cool air. For the first time in years, my decisions were entirely mine. And that was enough. The silence that had wrapped itself around the house for weeks began to change. Not with noise, but with presence. Marlene's daughter, Tessa, arrived just after noon that Saturday. She came with a canvas duffel, a laptop bag, and the quiet confidence of someone who moved through a hallway like it had always belonged to her. She wasn't loud. She didn't pry. She settled into the guest room with the same calm focus I remembered from my own university days. Plugged in her hard drive, organized her textbooks, stacked binders neatly beside the nightstand. Tessa was studying archival science, and her voice already carried that steady rhythm of someone used to preserving stories. By evening, the whole house felt different. She made tea in my kitchen like she'd lived there forever. She hummed a tune I hadn't heard in decades, an old folk song, soft and familiar. The smell of lemon verbena drifted down the hallway, and later that night, I heard her typing, steady and patient, like Robert's old typewriter humming from the basement. There was something grounding in that sound. Over the next few days she became part of the rhythm of the house. She took out the trash without being asked, labeled my old photo albums, and even offered to digitize the notebooks I'd used during my years at the library. She treated everything with care and never tried to impress. She just did the work. On the third day I handed her a copy of my legal folder. Not the originals but clean, clear copies. The affidavit, the power of attorney, the will and transcripts of the recordings. She stored them on an encrypted drive, added backup protocols, and uploaded them to a secure university-grade cloud system. That night Daniel called. His name flashed on the screen but I let it ring. No voicemail. Later, Tessa sat at the dining table and asked if I wanted to help her label the boxes in the garage the next morning. I said yes. And it didn't feel like I was just saying yes to cardboard and tape. It felt like I was saying yes to something more. To motion, to life beyond survival mode. The rooms no longer echoed when I walked through them. The kitchen had fingerprints again. The floors needed sweeping more often. And I liked it. And if this moved you, I'd love for you to carry it with you. Maybe not loudly. Maybe just for a little while longer.